Good morning. Excuse me. My name is Cassie, and I have to give my precursor before I speak to any large group of people. I am an engineer. If you have ever had the pleasure of interacting with engineers, we are not known for our social skills. So the first couple of minutes here, I may appear to babble. And that is me allowing you into my personal zone. Okay. I am a grandmother. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter. And I just spent a week with her. And when you're a parent, you are focused on living life. But when you become a grandparent, you begin to enjoy life. Because you think about everything that your child did to you. And I hate to say this, but it is your prayer that your grandchild will do it to your child. Everything that you did not allow your child to do, you let your grandchild do. And when they do it, you give them a hug. And when your child returns home, you give them a sly look and you say, I hope I didn't teach him any bad habits. It is when you become a grandparent that you really begin to appreciate and understand life. You see, life is a journey. It is a journey that begins on the day that you are born, and it is a journey that ends on the day that you die. And some of us are fortunate enough to have that journey last for decades. And that journey is filled with goodness, is filled with badness, is filled with joy, and is filled with pain. It's filled with love, and it's filled with hate. But in the process of living this thing that we call life, sometimes we get so consumed and so focused on it that we forget that God exists. And oftentimes I have had to be reminded that God exists. You see, I am the mother of 3 children. They're adults now. And my youngest one is a girl, and for some reason she is my most vocal child. And I remember one day she said, Mommy, she said, why do you believe in God? And I could give her scripture, but that's not who I am. Like I said, I keep it real. So I took it to a level that she understood. And I said, baby, I believe in God because he done kept me from killing y'all. And I work with engineers. And we're used to being very logical. And one day, one of my coworkers came to me and he said, Cassandra, he said, how do you know that God exists? And I said, I know that he exists because I have seen his face. You see, I have seen his face when I am at work and they getting on my last nerve. They in that mode that I call cray-cray, that's short for crazy. And I am convinced that I'm the only sane person in the house. And I'm trying to figure out how to deal with this. And somebody will call me on my phone and they will say, Cassandra, do you want to go to lunch? And that's when I know that I have seen the face of God. So I said yes, and I go have lunch with God. I know that God exists when I am at church and I am sitting in the back pew and I am consumed with feelings of sadness. And someone that I don't know senses something about me, and they walk past me and they hand me a piece of paper, and all it says on it is, when I am at my weakest, he is at his strongest. And then I know that I have just seen the face of God. Now, what I am going to tell you is the story of a time that I saw the face of God. Now, to tell you this story, what I have to do is I have to set the background for it. I have to introduce you to the two main characters. Now, the first character is a 16-year-old colored girl in Mississippi back in 1958. Her name is Theola. Now, Theola is one of 9 children. She is the youngest. Her mother's name is Ella Williams, and her father's name is George Williams. And Ella and George had a death do us till we part type of marriage. Now, George was the type, when he got his paycheck on Friday, they usually didn't see him again until Sunday night, after he had spent his entire paycheck. So Ella learned to depend on the kindness of her neighbors. When her children needed food to eat, it was her neighbors that came over with cornbread cakes to help feed them. When her children needed clothing, it was her neighbors that would give her their children's hand-me-downs so that her children would have clothes to wear. When Ella needed a babysitter because she needed to go somewhere, it was her neighbors that stepped in and watched her children. You see, that's what they mean when they say it takes a village to raise a child. Now, George was one of 2 children, the only boy, and he was spoiled. I mean, George owned a car back in 1930 in Mississippi, which was unheard of, and he was considered quite the catch around town. Ella, her upbringing wasn't as fortunate. You see, Ella's parents were sharecroppers, and every morning her father would go out to the fields to work, and he would leave her and her younger brother at home with her mother. Her mother was a housewife. And when he'd come home every evening, the meals would be cooked, the house would be clean, and they'd have supper and do what families do. But one evening, when Ella was 2 years old, her father had gone out to the fields. When he came home, he walked into the house and he noticed the house wasn't clean like it usually is. He noticed that the children hadn't been fed. When he walked into the bedroom, he saw his wife still laying in bed, so he assumed she must be sick. She wasn't. You see, Ella's mother had died in her sleep. Ella was only 2 years old. So the first thing her father did was he had to find a new wife. I mean, how does a single man raise 2 babies by himself? He found a new wife, and this wife had 6 children of her own. And she wasn't particularly partial to Ella. So at the age of 12, Ella married. She had 2 children. Her husband was abusive. And she prayed, like anyone would do in that particular case. She prayed that he would stop. God answers your prayers, but he doesn't necessarily answer them the way you expect him to answer them. Ella's first husband died. The beating stopped. Well, that's how Ella eventually came upon George. They met and they married. You see, that's the story of Theola. Now, the second character in this story is a woman named Miss Dorothy. And Miss Dorothy was somewhere around 30 years old. She and her husband had just moved to Mississippi from Canada. He worked with the pipelines, laying down the pipes. And they were planning to be there for at least a year, maybe 2 years. And when you move to a new town, the first thing you do is you join the church, because that is the center of the community. That is where you meet your friends. That is where you make new friends. So that's what she and her husband did. They became very active in the church. They joined the community organizations. And she was at a women's group meeting one night, and one of the other ladies told her, they said, Dorothy, you know what you need to do? You got 3 children here. You need to hire you a nanny. That's how Miss Dorothy met Theola. Theola was Miss Dorothy's 16-year-old nanny. Now, Theola went to school every day. And there was something about Theola that Miss Dorothy didn't know. You see, Theola had a dream. She wanted to go to college. But she knew she couldn't. Her parents couldn't afford to send her. Her parents were poor. Well, poor is an overstatement. Her family was so poor they could only afford the P and the O, so they was po. And once a week, they would go out to the trash dump to look for things. Now, as a child, Theola didn't understand why they were doing this. You see, in her child's mind, they were going out to look for pirate's treasure. She was an adult before she understood why they made those weekly trips to the dump. So Theola knew that her parents could not send her to college. But she had a great aunt. And this great aunt didn't have any children. And she told Theola, she said, Theola, if you do really good in school and keep your grades up, I got enough money. I'll send you to college. And I'm going to write out some papers, so if something happens to me, you will have that money to go to school. So every day after school, Theola would go to Miss Dorothy's and watch after her children. You see, life is funny. The thing about living is we are all under the illusion that we can plan our lives. But we don't. Life is about how you react to the things that happen in life. 2 weeks before Theola was scheduled to graduate from high school, her great aunt died. Theola cried because, you see, she had to learn to accept her new reality. In 1958, in Mississippi, a colored girl, now her options for a career was to either be a nanny or be somebody's housekeeper. They tried to find the papers that her great aunt said she was going to sign. When they found them, she hadn't signed them. Well, Monday, Theola went to work at Miss Dorothy's. And Miss Dorothy was excited. She said, Theola, she said, the company is going to move us. It's going to relocate us. And you know, I would love for you to come with us and be our permanent nanny. Theola started to cry. You see, she had never shared her dreams with Miss Dorothy. And she sat down and she told Miss Dorothy about how she wanted to go to college. And she knew that now she would not be able to. And she asked her to give her a couple of days to think about it. But you see, in the midst of those tears, Theola had not realized that her words had not fallen on deaf ears. When Miss Dorothy's husband came home, she told him about Theola's situation. And she said, we need to do something for that young girl. So her husband went to the men's group at church. And he told them about the little colored girl that worked for him that wanted to go to college. And he asked them maybe they could do something to help her. The men said, are you serious? You expect us to give our money to some little colored girl? Well, when he told Miss Dorothy about it, she figured she'd go talk to the women's group. It wasn't going to hurt anything. When she addressed the women's group, one of the women said, now, if I send Theola to college, then who's going to wash my clothes and take care of my children? But now at the same time, there were some women that had a soft spot in their heart like Miss Dorothy. And when they would go home in the evenings and their husbands would come home and they would be washing their clothes, that's how I discovered that women are very powerful. Because as they was washing their clothes, any money that they found, they gave it to Theola. Those women took that money that their husbands refused to give and gave it to Theola anyway. Well, Over the weekend, Theola and her family was sitting on the front porch and a car pulled up, and out stepped Miss Dorothy. And she looked at Theola's brother. She said, "I have something in my car. Can you get it out of the back for me?" And it was a trunk. And he sat it on the front porch. And when they opened that trunk, it was filled with everything you would need for college. There was clothing. There was toothpaste. There was deodorant. And you got to understand, to Theola, that was a big thing because she had never used toothpaste and deodorant. They used baking soda for everything. And in there was a box. And in that box, there was a Bible. And there was a page that was marked. And Theola opened that Bible, and it was in 2 Timothy, and there was a scripture highlighted. And it said, "Study to show yourself approved." And in that Bible was an envelope. And in that envelope was $250. Now, back in 1958, $250 was enough to pay for room, board, tuition, and fees for an entire semester at college. And Theola started to cry. And her mom was crying. And she looked at her mama and she said, "Mama," she said, I can't go to college, Mama. Y'all can't keep me in college." She said, "Baby, don't you worry about that. You going to that university. And me and your daddy and your brothers and sisters, we're going to figure out a way to keep you at that university." Come that fall, Theola went off to college. When winter break came, her mama wouldn't let her come home. Because you see, if she came home, they didn't have enough money to send her back. And somehow, her family managed to raise another $250. And that got her through the second semester of college. And when she came home for the summer, she went looking for Miss Dorothy, but she couldn't find her. Miss Dorothy had moved. You see, Theola wanted to let Miss Dorothy know what she had done on that day. You see, on that day, what Miss Dorothy had done was she had given a little girl hope. She had showed her compassion. She had showed her that she mattered to somebody. What Miss Dorothy had done was she had showed a mother that her daughter's dreams were important and that her daughter's dreams could be reached. Theola didn't find Miss Dorothy. She went on back to school and she went on with life. She graduated. She got married. She became a teacher in the school systems in East Baton Rouge Parish in Louisiana. She went back to college. She got a master's degree in education. And she had children. And those children went to college. And those children have master's degrees and PhDs. And those children have children. And Theola's grandchildren have master's degrees and PhDs. As time went on, Theola had raised her children and they moved away from home. And she retired. And she and her husband returned to Mississippi. They built their retirement home. One day, Theola was at the county courthouse, and a gentleman walked up to her that she had known from her years as a child there in Mississippi. And he asked her, how did her life go? And she told him about Miss Dorothy. And he said, "You know what, Theola?" He said, "I have a radio program. Do you mind if I share your story on my program?" She said, "Sure." He shared the story. And then a couple of weeks later, he called her back and he said, "Theola," he said, "I've been thinking, I'm an attorney, and maybe through my contacts, I can find Miss Dorothy." She said, "Well, you can look if you want to, but she got to be well into her late 80s. She's probably dead by now." He said, "Well, just humor me. Just let me look." He searched. And after many conversations and many phone calls, he found Miss Dorothy. He found Miss Dorothy living in a nursing home in Houston, Texas. Miss Dorothy was still alive. You see, I am the oldest child of Theola. And in 2017, I took my mother to Houston, Texas to see Miss Dorothy. They had not seen each other in over 60 years almost. And when we walked into the room, Miss Dorothy put my mother's face into her hands, and she looked at her and she said, "I would know you anywhere." And at that moment, I knew that I had seen the face of God. And as they sat and they began to talk, my mother asked her, she said, "In Mississippi, back in 1958, what possessed you to help a little colored girl?" She said, "I just knew it was the right thing to do." She said, "Well, what happened after you did that?" She said, "Some of the folks at church quit talking to me and my husband." She said, "Some people even went so far as to burn a cross at the end of the road." She said, "But I've never regretted what I did." You see, I tell people that all it takes is just one person, a family member, a friend, a stranger. All it takes is one action, a good action, a bad action, to change the life of a little 16-year-old colored girl in Mississippi, to change the legacy of a family. And I tell folks, I have seen the face of God. And y'all know what? He don't look nothing like me. He's not even the same age as me. What I saw in Miss Dorothy was the compassion. I saw the God in her. And I tell folks, Beyonce, I'm sorry, y'all, but she ain't got nothing on Miss Dorothy. Because Miss Dorothy, to me, is the most beautiful woman that I will ever see in my lifetime. So when you're sitting here and you're thinking about life, this is what I will ask you to do. I will ask you to become that just one. Because you see, you don't know where God is. You may be the one that God has chosen to show his face in. Or God may be sitting right next to you and you don't even know it. Be that just one to make a difference. And who knows, maybe 50 years from now, some person will be looking for you. And they will find you. And they will tell you, "Thank you for being the face of God."